Hey everyone, welcome to Everything Women's Wrestling, the FloWrestling podcast where we talk about everything women's wrestling. I'm your host, Ayres. This is episode 6. Today we have a very important conversation. I am joined by Kerry McCoy, Jahi Jones, Alexis Porter, and the topic of conversation is historically Black colleges and universities. So we get into conversation about a little bit about educating our listeners about HBCUs and what they are and how they were established and why they were established. We talk about all kinds of information related to the HBCU Wrestling Initiative, where we see individuals like Kerry and Alexis and Jahi working super hard to create opportunities for athletes to wrestle at historically Black colleges and universities across the country. Because right now, due to their efforts, we do have one school, Morgan State University, that's going to be starting a wrestling program for men. But that's the only option, and the only option is for men at this point. So we talk about their efforts and how that will be relatable to creating women's programming. We talk about, are there non-varsity options for women to wrestle at HBCUs now so they don't have to wait? That led us to conversations about RTCs and some recent high-level high school athletes that have made some choices to wrestle at RTCs. And so the conversation jumped around a bit, and it's all super valid, and it was super interesting to talk to these folks. So I hope that you join us. It's an important conversation, and one where I think our national wrestling community can really be impactful with creating these programs if we all get involved and we all take some ownership for it. So it's a really important conversation that I hope that you listen to. So please join us. All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat a little bit today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lori, for having us.
You are so welcome. How's everyone doing today? I'm feeling like a little bit, I don't know about you guys, but I'm like in that wrestling mode of like the grind of the wrestling season here in the Ayres house. Are you guys feeling that?
Yes, very familiar. I'm excited for Friday rolling around the corner.
I know, right? I'm grateful, right, that like we have a season, but at the same time, I'm sort of like, oh gosh, I forgot how grindy this can feel.
Yeah, a little bit different on the RTC route. So little less stressed in the college season, but definitely can feel it being around the college guys and the coaches. So I get to see it from a distance after going through it personally for a long time. So definitely know what's up.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to get into so many cool topics today about HBCUs. So thank you guys so much for being here. So before we do, I guess we should set the stage with, there's some people who might be tuning in or listening who literally don't know what the acronym HBCU stands for. So maybe we just like literally start with that.
Yeah. So HBCU, Historically Black College and University. HBCUs were established back in the day when Black people weren't allowed to attend colleges. So, there are a few very productive, forward-thinking people that decided, hey, if we can't go to the other ones, we'll create our own. And that's really a foundational aspect of the HBCUs. And I think a lot of times when people think about HBCUs, they think that it's only, Black people on campus, and it's not. It's, historically Black because that's where it started. But there is a decent amount of diversity on the campuses, but it is, tilted towards having people of color represented in on the campuses and really getting experience, educational experience, but you also experience your culture and learning more about, what it is to be an African American in our country, and getting a lot of historical things that may not be taught in mainstream schools, whether it's, high school, middle school, elementary schools, but in other college campuses as well. So it gives that unique perspective of getting a cultural education, get a traditional education, and then obviously when it comes to athletics, being able to have that aspect as well.
Yeah, and so I literally, I'm embarrassed to admit, but I didn't know about the term HBCU until the organization HBCU Wrestling formed. And so I'm sure there's a lot of listeners out there that are hearing it for the first time, unfortunately. So good to just start with that. So we're setting the table. And then, so I'd love to just, have each of you take a second and share a bit about about your background, and hopefully Jahi jumps back in with us here, get some better internet connection, but we'll kind of keep our fingers crossed. But Alexis, why don't we start, if you don't mind, with you, and maybe you can highlight, when you tell us a little about your background, when you made those decisions to go to your college or university, were you able to consider some HBCUs, and how that process worked for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from New York. I started wrestling when I was 10. My first dream school was actually Northern Michigan University, which was the Olympic Education Center at the time. And then when I was in eighth or ninth grade, I think the program got dropped, and I had to kind of reassess my entire college recruiting process. And Howard was always one of my dream schools. Howard, obviously, one of the most prestigious historically Black colleges or university that most people have heard of or know by name. Lot of famous celebrity alumni. It's a really great school, and I was always really, really bummed realizing that there was no opportunities for me to go to any HBCU because there just was no wrestling there, especially for women. Obviously, there's the college programs when I was going through my recruiting process were few and far in between. It was right around, I think, 32 programs when I signed as a senior. So sadly, it wasn't something that I was actually even able to consider despite wanting and having a desire to go to Howard. That was just not in the question for me at the time. So, yeah, I mean, that part of what we're doing now is so important because, I mean, there's tons of women and young girls across the country that are having similar struggles with their recruiting process and thinking that their options are so limited to them, and this is the whole point of this, that we're growing the sport in a way where young Black women can have more opportunities to actually get a piece of their culture. And these schools are so enriching. I could go on and on about it, but yeah, that's a little bit about my background, I guess.
So, okay, so there was 32 schools when you were that's amazing, because now we have 114. So
Yeah.
we made quite a jump. Wow. But right?
Yeah.
But no HBCUs, and we still have no female options for HBCUs. We'll talk a little bit about clubs later on. I have my FAMU logo here because they are working hard to create some opportunities through the club route at FAMU, and we have some lovely women who reach out to us on our Division I social pages and are working hard. But yeah, no Division I or varsity options at HBCU. So interesting. Okay. All right, Kerry, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background? I mean, you have a big claim to fame here in my neck of the woods. So it's kind of goes without saying, but
yeah, and it's again, thank you for the opportunity to be on the show, and it's really exciting. People that don't know, Lori and I have known each other for a long time. Chris, her husband, is head coach at Princeton University, and we coached together when I was at Lehigh earlier, and competed against each other in college. So we have a long tradition, long history of relationship, and it's just great to see what she's been able to do. This opportunity with Flow is huge for the sport, wrestling in general, not just for women's wrestling. And knowing how hard that they've been working through the years to elevate the sport of wrestling as a whole is just it's awesome. So I'm really excited to be able to spend this time with you and see the fruits of your labor continue to grow. So thank you for the opportunity. For me, unlike a lot of people currently wrestling, there was wrestling in HBCUs when I was coming out of high school. Actually, a bunch of my teammates went to HBCUs and wrestled. I had teammates that wrestled at Morgan State. I had teammates that wrestled at Howard, and it was a pretty cool thing because one of the reasons that HBCUW was formed was to give that option back. So when I was coming out of high school, I had the option to look at HBCUs. My father graduated from HBCU, and so at 2-3 years old, I was on Morgan State campus. He was a football player, and so I had that experience to see how much of a difference the experience on an HBCU was available. And I made the choice when I was coming out to, I wanted to make Olympic teams. I wanted to be on that international route. So that's what really led my final decision And I was also looking at academic schools. I was looking at, the Ivy League schools, and I was looking at, some of the HBCUs that I had teammates and friends that were there. So I had a wide variety of choices coming out. And so that's really why the formation of HBCUW was to be able to give, young Black men and women the opportunity to choose. If you want to pursue your sport and be able to gain a deeper understanding of your history and culture, you will have that opportunity once these wrestling programs start. So like I said, I was fortunate to have that opportunity, and I chose, to go a different route. But knowing the way, growing up with my dad being there, growing up with some of my teammates that had gone on and wrestled, and then afterwards, which was really pretty amazing that, through my collegiate career, some of the athletes that I'd known and came to, get really strong relationships that wrestled at these HBCUs throughout have been very significant, very important in, helping in a lot of different ways in my development, my growth. So even though I didn't go to an HBCU, I had so much experience and exposure that really helped shape and mold the type of person I am today. So very thankful for that opportunity and looking forward to presenting more opportunities in the future.
Wow. So your dad went to Morgan State.
I did. Yeah. So it's a really, the parallels with this situation, I grew up on and around campus. I spent 12 years in the state of Maryland, Beat the Streets Baltimore. Lydell Henry is the executive director there. And I've done a lot of work with Beat the Streets Baltimore. I've had summer camps on Morgan State's campus. So, just a lot of different connections. So when the opportunity to bring Morgan back was right in front of us, I was super, super excited and really, personally invested as well as for the organization. So, it definitely worked out really well.
And that must have been a hard choice for you then, Kerry, because you fully understood, what you would be missing not going to an HBCU, seeing what your dad had been exposed to and what he had exposed you to as, being an alumni at Morgan State. And so would you say, you had mentioned, you had big aspirations in the sport of wrestling. You wanted to be an Olympian. You wanted to continue wrestling on the senior level. You knew maybe after college, even when you were applying at the, to matriculate into a university or college. But would you say that the facilities at a Power 5 school like Penn State sort of and some of the resources that you saw on your recruiting trips impacted you? Because we'll talk a little bit about like what are the pros and cons, right? Of once we see some HBCUs be, get established at the Division I level, will there be some issues with recruits and some of the differences and disparities maybe that might be seen in terms of resources?
Yeah, and I think when you talk about college athletics as a whole, you're going to see disparities. SEC football is a lot different than Atlantic 10 basketball, right? So I think that those are the things that are prevalent, in any space. I think when it comes to HBCUs, for us with our mission is that we want to provide an opportunity for these programs to be on a very high, success is a relative term, but a successful trajectory to be able to compete and have those experiences on the highest level. So facilities, resources, all the things that, a top tier program is going to be expected to have is what we're looking to put in these HBCU programs. So, the idea of with Morgan, they're getting a new facility built and wrestling is going to, they had a program, the facilities that they had when the program was there have, been repurposed. So now they're building a new facility. So wrestling is going to be in a new facility. And, we look at those opportunities for all the programs to really invest in making sure that the experience isn't just, hey, we have a team, now let's move on. But we want to have a team that has, an opportunity to have all of our athletes have a great experience while they're doing their sport, while they're getting their cultural experience, while they're building that legacy. And really the next generation can continue to grow and benefit from that. So it's huge. That's why this organization is put together, really get behind it and put these programs in a position to be successful, and not just in wins and losses, but in overall experience.
So you're invested. It's going to be the best of both worlds. This organization is working to make sure that those athletes are going to have everything they need. Okay. I'm hearing you loud and clear. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, Jahi. And so listen, we don't let perfect get in the way of pretty good. So there's going to be technical difficulties sometimes on podcasts, and we just keep rolling with it. So glad to see you back. Thank you for wrestling back and getting getting on with us again. So Jahi, would you share a little bit about your background, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And it cut out earlier before, but so I'm Jahi. I'm the executive director for the HBCU Wrestling Initiative. And right now, really kind of my job is to kind of steer this mission. There's a lot of great importance being able to establish wrestling at historically Black colleges and universities. And so my background, I was able to attend the University of Maryland where I wrestled there. And once I graduated, I was able to go off and get my master's. But just really understanding how important wrestling was into the overall shaping and development of myself kind of makes this a lot more important for me, and just understanding that the impact that this organization has the potential to have on many young boys and girls' lives make it so fulfilling for me every day as I work towards trying to get to our mission.
Awesome. I know, Jahi, you're doing a lot of working super hard. It sounds like you're at like a little bit of a event right now. So we appreciate you hopping on and sharing what you can. So it's all good. All right. So let's run through some questions to make sure that listeners are just a little bit at least educated on HBCUs and where we currently are landscape wise. So maybe Alexis, could you just explain? I know we're going to, when we talk about HBCUs, we'll sometimes also hear the acronym PWI. So can you explain the difference between those for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Kerry said, HBCUs are historically Black college or universities. Just to give a little historical context, these are universities that were founded prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Obviously, after slavery and during the Reconstruction period, Black enrollment wasn't a thing in pretty much any university. And this was the case for, I think, about a century after, like, going through the Reconstruction period. So a lot of universities weren't allowing African Americans to actually enroll in colleges. So what was done was we kind of started our own. And you'll notice a lot of these HBCUs are actually located in the South, because that was the area of Reconstruction that needed the most work, the most help, where there was the fewest opportunities for Black men and women to get an education. So, and a PWI is a predominantly white institution. I myself went to a PWI. The majority of colleges are PWIs. And I hope that gives a little bit more clarity to your listeners.
Yeah, it does. And so Alexis, I hear you saying, like, because we're talking about historically Black colleges and universities, there will be no new HBCUs forming. Is that correct? Like, you can't say like we're a new HBCU because we wouldn't be historical. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure there's a pretty specific accreditation process that all of these universities have gone through, like from the Secretary of Education and things like that. So these are older institutions for sure, and that you won't see new ones being made. And I think right now the current number is between 101 or 107. Jahi or Kerry, correct me if I'm wrong.
I got 104, but the one thing that I did want to mention is important is HBCUs, they represent 3% of the overall population of colleges, but they account for 50% of Black graduates, 80% of Black doctors. And so these institutions have a lot of historical context and a lot of, it's been transformational, kind of what Alexis alluded to earlier, in the sense where right after slavery, the end of slavery, HBCUs were established to be able to help former slaves kind of transition into the middle class. And so that's kind of the historical context of it. And these institutions continue to be able to produce a lot of the Black leaders of today, just with the rigor that they have in the background. So I just wanted to add that just to give further context of like the situation of HBCUs and how important they are as academic institutions inside of the Black community.
Okay, so I'm getting a better idea, and hopefully listeners will as well. And so I heard you, Alexis, say that there are a good number of HBCUs in the South. And so are there additional regional pockets or areas where we see more HBCUs? Just so when we say South, it's like we know Morgan State in Maryland, and then where is Howard University? Because I heard you mention DC. So like Virginia, Delaware, Maryland seems like a pocket of where some schools of some HBCUs are. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would say Alabama, Georgia, Florida. Those are some of the states that I can think of off the top of my head that have multiple HBCUs within that state. What's kind of neat that I would like to point out is that I've noticed a lot of there aren't as many collegiate opportunities for Division I wrestling in the South. So like we've had tons of hammers come out of states like Texas, but people are always complaining like there's no Division I college that has a wrestling program where people in the state of Texas can actually stay in state. They always have to go out of state to continue their collegiate wrestling career. And there is HBCUs in Texas. So I think it really presents a really, really amazing opportunity for all wrestlers with collegiate aspirations because, like we've already said, because HBCUs are historically Black, it does not bar white students from attending. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really neat because it offers an opportunity for other students to even attend a wrestling program that maybe they wouldn't have the opportunity to otherwise.
Right, because there isn't a D1 program, right? In Florida, I know that. Or Georgia, I don't think. Yeah. Interesting.
I think the number is around 25 Division I programs of those HBCUs.
Okay, so out of the over like 105, 107 HBCUs, 25 of those are Division I NCAA programs. Okay, that was a question I had as well. All right, that makes a lot of sense. Are there schools in the HBCU schools that are also NAIA? Do we know?
I believe so. Yes, there's some of all divisions. So there's Division II. I think there is NAIA as well. I'd have to double check. Jahi or Kerry might know more definitively than me, but yeah, kind of spread out across the board. But I just remember for sure it was, I think 25 was the number I remember counting for Division I.
Okay, so ultimately there's quite a few schools that you can be targeting, because it seems like Division I is the focus right now. Is that right for HBCU wrestling? Okay. So Kerry, yeah. So tell me a little bit about how HBCU wrestling formed. Was it something that did it come out? And we've heard sort of a little bit about the Black Wrestlers Association. Is there an affiliation there?
Yeah, so it it was a collaboration. So Nate Parker, who was an All-American at Oklahoma, he actually wrestled for me at Penn State. I've known Nate forever, and he has a good relationship with Mike Novogratz. And right around the time of George Floyd's murder, we had there was a lot, and that actually was one of the things that sparked the BWA's creation. And at the same time, Mike is very active in social engagements and social justice, and Nate and his relationship. So they were talking, and Mike, got in touch with Nate, and he said, "Hey, what can we do?" And Nate does a lot of work with HBCUs, and between the two of them, they came up with this idea of let's get wrestling back in HBCUs. That's something, because as Jahi mentioned, the number of leaders, the number of successful people that come out of these schools is it's very high. Now we can add to the pool of those individuals that had wrestling in their background. So that was really the impetus of it. And then they got in touch with me, and we started putting together a plan, and we were meeting, we were talking, and ultimately it was Nate, myself, and a guy, Billy Watterson. We were on calls and going back and forth and trying to get stuff. And everybody was busy, and it was just really tough to to keep things flowing. So we said, hey, we've got to get somebody that can really run the day to day and keep this thing rolling in an effective way. And we hired Jahi as our director. And once Jahi was hired, it took off, right? It just, he boots to the ground, he was on it, and he was fired up and being able to keep us on task, keep us organized, keep us structured. And then, the regular meetings, were, if we all couldn't get together, Jahi would get each one of us individually and find a way to make sure that there was continuity, and making the phone calls and making the connections and getting in touch with campuses. And that's the way it was really rolling. So it started off with, just the idea of similar to what was going on across the country. People look out and say, what can we do about all these things that are plaguing the Black community? And this is one of the things that came out of it. And it really, like I said, took off once we had Jahi that could take the reins and just keep everything structured and organized. And that's where we're at this point. And then he said Morgan State was one of the most successful programs in recent years, and one of the last few to drop. So it was a great opportunity. And like I said, with my connection to Morgan State, with Jahi being from Maryland and having that be one of his school's options, when he was looking out, it was a really natural progression to go after that school. And in an area where it's rich in talent and wrestling. Baltimore, you're close. You got Maryland, you got Virginia, you got New York, you got New Jersey, you got Ohio, you got Pennsylvania, Virginia. Like, it's just such a hotbed region for wrestling. So it really made sense to target that school and keep on building from there.
And you are building, right? So one down, 24 to go. So, but I really, this is the Everything Women's Wrestling Show. So we do want to talk about, Morgan State agreeing to bring on a men's program, but we are quickly noticing the lack of the women's program. So we do want to see additional D1 programs for women. I'm always plugging the D1 women's wrestling thing. So when I heard about the initiative for HBCUs, I was so excited because I thought, oh my gosh, this is our chance to continue to add programming. We have 3 D1 women's programs. So Alexis, I would love to hear from you because you went to a PWI, right? And so what do you think are the pros and the cons of, hopefully we soon get some options so women have that choice. So what would you see being the pros and the cons of attending a PWI as opposed to an HBCU? Why do you think it would be important to have these options so women can choose? We just saw Kennedy and Corinna Blades commit to an RTC at the Sunkissed Kids in Arizona. So would they have made a different choice if they had an option? Who knows? So I'd love to hear from you about that.
Yeah, well, I did go to a PWI. I went to McKendree University, which is a very small private institution in Southern Illinois, 30 minutes north of St. Louis. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this general area and region. And I'm from New York originally, upstate New York, specifically Clifton Park, New York. And my high school was predominantly white. And this is part of the reason why I actually really wanted to go to an HBCU originally, is because I felt like there was so much culture and history, and enriching, a really enriching opportunity that I was missing out on, especially going to a high school where there really wasn't that many minorities. In a lot of my classes, I was the only person of color. And that's something that has always stuck with me. It's definitely influenced the way I've been raised. And I know for a fact that HBCUs have a lot of prestige. There is a level and a standard of excellence that that really is something that motivates and drives Black women and Black men. It's kind of fun sometimes to look at the list of notable alumni from these institutions. A couple I can think off the top of my head. Obviously, our Vice President, Kamala Harris, she went to Howard. Thurgood Marshall was an HBCU grad. One of my favorite actors, Chadwick Boseman, who we all recognize as the Black Panther, he gave a commencement speech at Howard, where that is his alma mater as well. And there's tons and tons and tons more. And seeing these amazing men and women of color go on to accomplish these iconic, amazing feats, I was always really inspired to attend universities like that, because I felt like it was an experience that could, one, shape me as an individual, and two, it really offers you the opportunity to be introduced to so much rich history and culture that you really may not get at a PWI. I felt like at my university specifically, I had to really go out of my way on my own to kind of fill in the gaps of that education. So I was able to take African American history courses and African American literature, where I learned all these different things that I had never been exposed to before. But a lot of my actual knowledge and research, that's self-directed, and I think sometimes it's nice to have organized education where you don't have to do it all on your own. So
Yeah. Okay. That's so great to hear, because I don't think people contemplate that, like you had to dig and research and network yourself in terms of your culture, right? And so to be at a PWI and of course, like, it's all anyone's choice, right? Like, it's not necessarily something that people of color or athletes of color are going to always choose. And I think even someone who is trying to develop opportunities at the Division I level for women, it's certainly not saying there's not great options for women's wrestling already, right? It's just we want to see all the options possible. So, Jahi and Kerry, I'd love to hear from you, and that fact that you went to PWIs and yet you're still working so hard to make sure that the people coming behind you have the opportunity to attend HBCUs. So do you both feel like, there's a piece of that you missed out on? Is there a little bit of regret there because you didn't, go that route?
No. So I guess I can speak for me. And Coach kind of alluded to when he was in school that they had wrestling at HBCUs. But for me in particular, they didn't. And so I just know, like, the opportunity piece is big. So being able to just get a college education, for me, that was life changing. For me and my family. And I think about so many of my high school teammates who might not have been ready to go to like a Big Ten school or a Division I school, but they might have been able to wrestle at a HBCU, and the opportunity and experience that they had. Ultimately, I'm happy the way that my cards played out the way they did, because had they not, I wouldn't be in a position where I'm helping start wrestling programs at HBCUs. So to say the least, I really appreciate like the fact, like, our mission and what we're doing, just because of the opportunities that it's going to give to others, right? Like, when I was going to pick schools, it was between Maryland, University of Maryland, or Morgan State, which are the two state schools, and I knew I had really no choice if I wanted to continue, at least have an opportunity to continue my wrestling goals, and that's why I chose Maryland. But now, thinking about to my younger self, if I had to make that choice, a year or right now in this year, I could have had that opportunity to go to Morgan State and possibly, wrestle at a school where the cultural, and just the historical aspects is designed to help get me along and make sure that I get the necessarily skills I need to be able to move on into life and business inside of the professional world.
So would that have been a more compelling choice, obviously, if Morgan State had wrestling? Like, I know Kerry was your coach, so like we'll have him close his ears for a second. But like, do you think he would have chose Morgan State?
Yeah, I honestly, it's like I probably would have went to Morgan State, and just because a lot of my friends went to Morgan State, and so I know when I got to Maryland, in particular, it was like I had to meet a whole new crowd of people, and obviously I was a social butterfly, so I was able to meet people no problem and get new friends, but it would have been different. I even just think about like homecoming. I went to Morgan State right after the announcement for their homecoming, and just the atmosphere, right? Like how everyone was and how it's like all family driven. It's just a wonderful thing, and I just wonder how much I probably missed out on, and so I'm using that to inspire me to go back to get like an advanced degree, and maybe I'll do that at a HBCU so I could at least get the experience somewhat. But yeah, I definitely, it definitely would have been a hard choice. But at least I would have had the choice to make. Like right now, like before, I didn't have the choice or not, right? And that's really what we want to give kids the opportunity to do. Is like, and not just boys. I'm glad that you brought the attention back that like we're on, everything women's wrestling, right? We're interested in getting both men's and women's programs started equally as hard. Because we really think that the impact and the skills that we learn through the sport of wrestling, it doesn't necessarily have a gender, it doesn't have a race, it doesn't have a size, right? It's universal. It's a development sport. So yeah, I know that kind of went on a little tangent, but I just thought it was important to mention that because it's like we really want to make sure both, because it's big on the opportunity piece, so people don't have to make the choice.
Yeah, and I think that good segue to that, because earlier we were talking about Bluefield State College. I think they're a Division II school. They recently committed to starting a women's program. So again, we talked about Division I, but there are opportunities that are going to continue to grow. And we had a conversation with some folks yesterday and just talking about the idea of, what happens if you don't get a program started or if you can't. And it's like, there are over 100 programs out there, and we're going to get programs started, right? So men's programs, women's programs, joint programs. And that's really what it's about. It's about that opportunity. And that's why this is such a big initiative, because there's so many young boys and girls that can be served. And Lori, you mentioned, like, not everybody's going to choose to go to HBCU, but they're going to have that option. And for me, when I was coming out, like I said, I did have that option. And one thing that I think that really, and I don't regret things because everything happens for a reason. But one of the things that I really think that helped me through my process was that I still had a connection. I had teammates that wrestled at HBCUs. Again, I said my dad went there. I had a lot of people that I would go, even through my competitive career, we'd go to events, and the wrestlers at Morgan State were there, and the wrestlers at Howard were there. So I could see, and my dad's coach, football coach, the one that recruited him, was also the wrestling coach. So for 3 or 4 years of my college career, I would see Coach Phil at these events. So I always had a connection, and even though I wasn't getting as deep of an experience as being on campus, when you go somewhere and you recognize that you look to your left and right, and there aren't too many people that look like you, you're going through it every day. So understanding that, the challenges and the obstacles that people of color face, that was something that I dealt with every day. And being able to have those connections to people that went to HBCUs, and also being at a non-HBCU, I was able to really, I wouldn't say pick and choose, because it really wasn't something I had to make a choice on a daily basis, but I had the opportunity to experience and recognize that there was something different. There was some other things that I could learn and grow and develop through it. So I think that's really what would really emphasize my experience of, I was able to achieve, my goals without having to lose a connection to my culture. It wasn't as deep of a connection if I were on campus every day, but I still had enough ties that I was able to recognize the challenges and the opportunities that were presented themselves. So, and that's what we want that to be afforded to, all the young boys and girls that are coming up, and have that opportunity to, have the choice. But if they do choose that they want to go and get a deeper understanding of the culture on a regular basis, that they're going to have those options, and not in a fly by night way, but a deep, impactful legacy opportunity where you're going to have that chance to make a difference, from your everyday experience.
Okay. And the cool thing is we have some success. So we're on the board. Morgan State is set to start a program in the 2023-2024 season. I saw recently that you guys put up a post about looking for the leader of the program. So the head coach search is on. And so that's a big deal, right? Finding that right person. So I think, there's a lot of people out there right now. We're getting contacted at Division I Women's Wrestling. And I know some of the national organizations have been getting contacted about interested colleges and universities that want to hear more about women's wrestling, for instance. So I think this conversation is going to be helpful for them. If you guys could just walk us through, like, what did that look like when you went into Morgan State University and talked to the administration? Were they like, yeah, bring it on. Let's hear more about this. Like, we're ready to do this. or was there more of a, back and forth? Like, what kind of questions did they ask you? What can we learn about that process so we can be successful the next time we go in to talk to administrations?
Yeah, I guess I can go ahead and take that. So when we had initial conversations with Morgan State, the main thing and the main piece we were looking for here is sustainability. How can we make sure that we're not only getting these programs started, but we're getting them started in a way that's sustainable and that we set them up in a way for success. So we worked directly with the administrators from Morgan State, trying to figure out what it looks like actually at their school. What does a wrestling program look like? How many scholarships? Ultimately, us as an organization, we had our own ideas of how we wanted that to look. We wanted to make sure that our coaches' salaries were competitive. We also wanted to make sure that each program provided at least 9 scholarships, right? And just overall structure of it. And so we worked our way out. We had numerous conversations, but ultimately we were able to land a deal in which both of us were very comfortable with, that would allow the program to have that sustainability piece, but also to be able to also create those opportunities. So the big piece there was just listening and making sure that they were getting the resources needed in order for the program to be successful.
Okay, so like you're pushing the easy button for them a little bit, right? Like you're like, this is how it's going to play out.
Yeah, we were really fortunate because Morgan State and a lot of the HBCUs in general, any program that has dropped a wrestling program, they usually have a typical group of people that are really fired up about getting the program back. So Morgan State's alumni, the administration, they were primed, and it was just figuring out how. So when we got the chance to talk to them, they already were ready for the idea. That people in the community were ready for the idea, and it's like, how are we going to do this? So sometimes they say, right, luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? And so we were in there and were able to build that. Some of the other schools that we talked to, they're not that far down the road. Some of them, the administration that's on campus were all brand new. So when they had a program on campus, 15, 18, 20 years ago, no one that's on campus currently really knew about it. So it's re-educating that group and understanding and teaching them the values of what the program are, but also just in general, what's it take to run a wrestling program? What do you need? How? The resources, the facilities, things like that. So it's on. Morgan State was a great opportunity because they were primed, ready to go, and they had the history and tradition. I mean, some of the most successful wrestlers in HBCU came from Morgan. They had 4-time All-Americans. They've had national champs. They've had people that competed. And, it was a short time Morgan was a Division II school, and they were one of the dominant schools in Division II. And there were times where, Morgan would go down and be competitive, not beat University of Maryland, the state school, the Division I school. So they had a lot of history and tradition, and, so that worked out. So when we go to other schools, we look at that as, kind of the gold standard, but there's some education pieces of it. So if we're looking at a program that hasn't had wrestling for a few years, when we talk about starting a program, and then, if they haven't had wrestling for a few years, obviously women's wrestling is something that, could seem foreign to them as well. And we say, well, wrestling is wrestling, right? And the resources, the facilities, the necessities, right? That is going to be across the board for a men's program and women's program. So it doesn't matter whether you're starting, a men's program or women's program, the resources and the commitment needs to be the same. And that's what Jahi was talking about before. Our commitment is to create opportunities for young men and women in our community. And when someone has questions, we're able to answer it based on a template, based on a format, based on stuff that we've come up with. But when it comes to, working with the D1 women's program, you have a lot of statistical analysis and a lot of resources that are focused on just women. So when we come in and if someone's looking at, okay, well, we want to start a women's program, we're looking at the men's program, but, what do we need to do for women's program? We can talk generally about the wrestling piece, and then we come and say, hey, Lori, send us the packet, and then you send us all the stuff that's specifically to women, and then we have that great partnership and able to help these schools down the road. So like you said, the easy button is a great way to put it, because if these schools are willing, hey, I think what our opening thing is, what would it take for you to start or restart your program? And that's where the conversation starts. So if they come in and say, we need X, Y, and Z, and then we go to work and figure out if we can do that. So that's really the simple formula for it. And like I said, it worked out really well with Morgan and some of the other schools. We're coaching them up a little bit, but I have no doubt that we're going to have a lot more opportunities in the near future.
Okay. So I love to hear that, right? I love to hear that the funding that you're doing is going to be equitable for men or women's programs, depending on what the administration wants to do. That's fantastic news. Are there any talking points that you think would be attractive to administrators in terms of compelling them to want to bring on women's programming? And can you share with us? I know, you don't want to make any false moves here or over promise and under deliver, but are there schools that are interested in beginning women's programming, or are you talking with any schools?
Yeah, and I let Jahi can go a little more detail if he wants, but it's like, I think that, and not to be presumptuous, I think they're all interested in starting programs, right? That's the circumstances of college athletics across the board, especially at Division I, there are limiting factors, right? And so it's a lot of them are, yes, we definitely interested. How can we do it, right? What resources are available? Where are we pulling our recruits from? where we're going to compete at, what, those type of deals. And that's where we get to work. But, and like I said, Jahi can talk. I don't think there's been one program that we've been in touch with that's like, nah, we're not interested. It's just like, we'd love to, but how can we? We'd love to, but we can't right now. We'd love to, but we need this. And I think that's where Jahi gets to put on the big heavy boots and start kicking down doors and be like, all right, you want to, let's get it done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the other part is like just showing the importance and that how competitive women's wrestling is being the fastest growing sport on a high school level, right? Any academic institution, they're gonna look at it from a supply and demand type of deal, right? So we have a supply of a lot of women's wrestlers, but and there's a demand for Division I women's wrestling, but there's not a lot of opportunities, right? And so when you start to look at some of the states where HBCUs are located, they don't even, some of the states, they don't have men's programs, but let alone having a Division I women's program. So that's really been the value proposition, along with just some of the things that we know the sport kind of teaches us. With the sport of wrestling, it's a sport where many of us aren't going to become like professionals, so we're not going to the WWE, right, or like UFC, but it's developmental things that we learn throughout the sport that we utilize throughout our careers. And a lot of wrestlers, we take academics serious. It's very serious. So for schools, they're not just getting a student that just wants to be a wrestler, right? They're getting a student that wants to better yourself through the sport of wrestling, by also still getting a good education at a premier academic institution.
Yeah, and one thing that I would add, just as far as, going back to the original question, like for supporters of women's wrestling, for advocates of women's wrestling, again, wrestling is wrestling, but there is a difference, right? The opportunity, the value proposition. And I think the number one thing that makes it a viable option is when there is that interest, right? When you know that, hey, and so I'll use Morgan State as an example, right? Once the word got out that Morgan State was starting a program, the AD at the time, he said he had contact from, high level high school wrestlers, some current college wrestlers, some, coaches from different schools that were like, hey, you start your program, we'll come and wrestle you. We'll show up there, we'll support you. When are you starting the program? Because that's something that I'm interested in looking at, right? If I'm going to graduate in 2 years, if you have the program, maybe I'll graduate and I'll do my last year at your school. So when the target audience, the athletes are the ones that are showing and reaching out and expressing interest, that really helps. So, in New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, right? When the wrestlers are talking about, hey, I can't wait to wrestle in college. I can't wait to wrestle at this level. I can't wait to go to these events. And now when Jahi goes in and talks to these schools, he could say, yes, right down the street, you have 15 of, the state's best athletes, that are wrestlers, and that are females, and they're excited for this opportunity and just building that. So really having, the support network of of women's wrestling, of, advocates that are always getting out there and you do a great job, Lori, with the, getting the content out there with, when somebody does something and the stats and all, and continue to have that mainstream, being able to showcase that and get everybody to share and retweet it and get the word out. But I think that's really the biggest thing that, advocates and supporters of wrestling in general can really do, is just get the word out. When there's a great athlete, make sure people know about that great wrestler that's coming as female wrestler, right? When there's someone that's looking for a collegiate opportunity, let them know that. And the more that can be, the more that story can be told, the more opportunities will, people look and say, administration says, yeah, well, where are we going to get our wrestlers? Well, look, there's 13 state placers right down the road from you. Okay, that's a start, right? And in this region, there's 55 women's wrestlers that are going to the national championship, and there's 6 wrestlers that have made world teams, whatever the stats end up being. And now those programs are like, oh yeah, because, we are going to be able to have a team. Because I think that's really the biggest fear for any program starting something new is, can we build a team and can it be sustainable? And that's what our organization is, to make sure that the sustainability is a key factor. And ultimately, 5-10 years down the road, we're going to have, hundreds of young Black men and women that are going to graduate from HBCUs, they're going to be able to give back positive to the community, give back positive to the sport, and really make a difference. And that's what it's all about. So kind of tagging those touch points and those talking points into the idea of spreading the word and having people, know what's out there.
Yeah, and Laura, I think one of the most important things to know about this whole process is that, like Jahi and Kerry have already said, the interest is there. I think a lot of times when we talk about starting new programs, it's this battle of proving your worth, showing that there's actually a need for it, a reason for it. What are the pros and the cons? And what's great about this is that the value is so clear. It speaks for itself when it comes to adding women's programs. The growth is undeniable, and a lot of the universities that Jahi and the rest of the organization have approached have shown great interest, and specifically in adding women's programs. I think a lot of them are leaning towards having parity in the sports that they offer for their university. So that is really the good news from all of this.
No doubt, Alexis. I mean, you cannot deny the growth, right? And I cannot wait to get our 2022 numbers across the country in terms of where we're going to be headed. And I love the points that you guys are both bringing up, that everyone's bringing up, really. Kerry, to your point, with women's wrestling programs, what we had heard from administrations was, where are the women on campus that want to wrestle? Show them to us. And, it was sort of like, well, how do we do that if there's not programming? And so instead of, when we put in some proposals and we're basically told no, we were like, well, we can't just wait, we can't just be like, okay, well, when you're ready, like, let us know, like, don't call us, we'll call you kind of thing. And we were like, well, we're not cool with that. And so we basically started to create some momentum and create clubs at D1 schools. So we could say, hey, look, here are the wrestlers that want to wrestle. They want these opportunities. And we're creating sort of what Jahi was talking about, which is that easy button of like, look, we're setting up the competitions. Look, we're setting up some financial structure. Look, we're setting up, potential coaches that would want to be part of Division I programs. So I think just creating momentum. And I love how we actually, HBCU wrestling and Division I women's wrestling have sort of united together in terms of a partnership, because if you guys are going into those administration meetings and they're saying those things like, no, we're not ready yet, we don't want to halt, right? We don't want to say to these young women of color, like, look, there aren't any options at all for you to go to an HBCU and wrestle, like, period. There's nothing. No, we don't want that, right? Like, we can create some club systems so that at least you can be part of the sport in some way and help be that trailblazer or that pioneer. So why is that important, right? Why is it important to create some momentum, Alexis, do you think, on these campuses? Like for example, FAMU, right? Like they are doing the work. Those women down there are like, look, it's not perfect. Like, it's clearly like we don't have the scheduled competitions. No one's sending us an itinerary. No one's sending us like the weekly like workout plan. But yeah, we're making this happen for ourselves. So why is that important for administrators to see, or why is that important for us as women to establish for ourselves, do you think?
Yeah, I've always been a firm believer that if you build it, they will come. I've kind of been a trailblazer and a pioneer for my entire career. I mean, I was the only woman on my high school varsity boys wrestling team, and we were state champions 3 out of the 6 years that I was a part of that program. And me graduating, going through that program, I saw an insane amount of interest after just one person. One person was able to do it. And I've seen this kind of trend happen over and over again at every stage of wrestling. And so I guess I would say when administrators ask, oh, well, where are the numbers? Where are these girls that want to wrestle? A lot of people don't realize they have these opportunities until they see it in front of them. So just starting these programs, getting the interest, it's already there. And when women see they have these opportunities, it's going to inspire a lot more to kind of come through the pipeline that way. That's what I've always believed.
Yeah, these non-varsity pathways are important, right? And you can build some really great competition schedules and practice opportunities. So the clubs are one non-varsity option. And I do want to talk about another non-varsity option, which is the RTC route, right? And so obviously there's no RTCs yet because we just have our first Division I program coming of age here and starting in the 23-24 season. So do you guys think that there will be an RTC? Is that something that is in your long-term plan at Morgan State?
Yeah. And actually, so the timeline is 22, 23. We expect to have a coach in place. We expect to have athletes on campus. 23, 24 is probably when, you'll have a full, regular schedule, competition, all that stuff. But we expect athletes to be on campus, this fall.
Mm-hmm.
Coach will be hired this spring. Athletes will be, whether they are already in school and they decide to come out for the team, or, coach will have the summer to recruit and get some. But we expect to get things rolling. And I think that that's the important thing to know, is that, like you were talking about with the women, right? If there are athletes on campus that are interested, they'll jump in. If there are athletes that you're recruiting, hopefully you get a coach hired in time to recruit and get people that are seniors to get in. So hit the ground running. With the RTCs, that's going to be something that's very important, to give opportunity for elite level athletes to be able to participate. Again, there might be some athletes in Baltimore that have Olympic aspirations that want to train, and, maybe different circumstances prevent them from leaving that area. Right. So they go to Morgan State, or they're living in the area, they want to train, they can go. So an RTC is definitely something that's on the horizon. It's not a part of, a varsity program's plan directly, but it's indirect, right? The intersecting circles. So, an RTC is going to be something. Now, again, the great thing with the RTC model as it stands right now, that elite athletes can go to different RTCs and train. So if you have, one or two athletes at your RTC and there's two or three at another RTC, they can get together and go to this school or go to this RTC and train, and then the next one come back here, and then obviously getting together for big training camps. And it was evident a couple of weeks ago when the RTCs got together and did the event down and outside of New Jersey, outside of Philly, with the Summit 3, where, RTCs, the Penn RTC, the LVWC, the Cornell Spartan Wrestling Club, New Jersey Wrestling Club, Princeton, all these clubs in this immediate area had representation. But then they had Minnesota, the Gopher Wrestling Club, sent a couple athletes out. So, the idea of being able to pool resources and get athletes together to train is something that really makes the RTC model special. And then when you talk about women's wrestling, we talked about the Blade sisters. They just committed to going to an RTC out in Arizona State. Right? Oregon State has got a commitment. They've got a bunch of high-level women that are training, competing out of there. So the RTC system is going to be very widely used to help grow the sport at every level. And, we're talking about creating an opportunity for success and legacy. The RTC system will definitely be a part of the HBCU wrestling program initiative.
Yeah, because those RTC options. Because I have a daughter who's going a non-varsity pathway, and you really do have quite robust opportunities for competition, right? There's almost 30 women's collegiate opens every year, so it obviously is a little bit of a financial burden to be able to fly to some of those competitions and be able to afford all those kinds of things, but they're there. And so fundraising can happen through clubs or through RTCs and then the USA Wrestling events. So, I was curious to hear about your take on that, Kerry, because you are, the head of the Lehigh Valley Wrestling Club, the RTC out there that's affiliated with Lehigh University. So, I hope that it continues to be an option for women that want to attend some of the schools of their dreams. And so, we'll kind of see how that all plays out. But what do you think about that, Alexis?
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan and a proponent of RTCs because, like we said, there's only 3 Division I women's wrestling colleges. And obviously me being now what feels like a dinosaur since the opportunities are so different than when I was going through my recruiting process, I would have most definitely wanted to go to a Division I college. And there wasn't any of that. And I think we've seen how successful the RTC model can be with the University of Iowa now having a Division I women's program, which is huge, such a historical place for wrestling. And I like to think that we can really kind of attribute what the original Hawkeye Wrestling Club members, the women there, Allie Reagan, Kayla Miracle, Forrest Molinari, I think we can really attribute their early part in that club is kind of what created, I think, the hype, the buzz, the interest, and that last push that was needed to kind of make that program come to fruition. And I believe that same kind of model can be used across the country at other schools and other universities. I wrestled in the Wyoming Wrestling RTC, which I was the first woman there. So again, creating and trailblazing opportunities that weren't there for me before, and hopefully contributing to, greater opportunities for women coming after me. So
I love that. And it's a perfect segue into the next question, because I do want to hear from each of you. One of the things that is growing the sport, like Alexis said, is people being gender allies, right? Like there had to be some individuals involved with the Iowa program that said, in a meeting, this is a good idea. We're going to work to bring women in. This is not everyone's going to agree with it. It's sort of like this step into the unknown, but we have to throw spaghetti on the wall sometimes and see what works. It's not going to always work, but we don't let perfection get in the way of pretty good, and we move forward. So that's like one of my new mottos. And one of my other mottos is like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it. It's like, I'm just trying things.
So you make it.
Yeah, exactly. So can you, if you guys can think of someone or some organization to that end who is working in women's wrestling and doing that work, which is not easy, and it's sometimes grueling, but I think pointing those people out and giving them some shout outs is important, right? Because we're working away here sometimes, and I'm certainly one of those people that some days I'm like, oh, I can't do it anymore. So getting that shout out is really helpful. So anybody who wants to start with one is great, and add one in.
I don't mind going first on this one. First person that comes to mind for me that I think of right off the top of my head is Sally Roberts. If you don't know who Sally Roberts is, you're doing something wrong. What an amazing, tenacious, crazy woman. She's a world bronze medalist. She's a combat veteran. She is a founder of Wrestle Like a Girl, a nonprofit organization doing exactly all of the hard groundwork that we've been kind of talking about. And just in the few years that she founded that organization, she's made huge leaps and strides and been a really, really pivotal contributor in the process of getting women's wrestling sanctioned at the high school level. And I don't remember off the top of my head how many states now are sanctioned at the high school level, but she has had a hand in every single one of them. And I know all of the hard work she's done. She's been an amazing advocate for women's wrestling. And during like the hard moments of the pandemic, when wrestling was at a full halt and we started coming back with these card initiatives. And I remember one of the big discussions in the beginning was like, okay, well, where are the women? Why aren't the women on the cards? And Sally was a huge proponent and fighter, and she advocated so that there would be at least one female matchup on every single card that I've seen. She got me on a card at Penn State, and a lot of times people were like, oh, well, we don't have the funding to add women, and she took it upon herself to fund those purses through her organization. So yeah, she deserves all the praise.
No doubt. She is not afraid to take up space for us, right, as women. And she'll have those hard, courageous conversations. And I could not agree more with you. So that's perfect. Thank you so much, Alexis.
Yeah, and I would mention, and obviously there's so many great champions. I look at right now with Joan Fulp and Andrea Yamamoto, and I mean, it goes without saying what you do, what you, Lori, are doing, and Jackie Davis, with the organization, your whole administrative board, and I know that for years the Fulp family has been pushing and really getting involved. So, Joan is an officer for USA Wrestling's board of directors. And she, when she speaks, she says what we're doing, and Andrea's name is the second word out of her mouth when she talks about it. So Joan and Andrea are doing a great job, and I'm sure you know that. One name, when you mentioned the question, like the obvious people that are active and are engaged, but I think about Trish Saunders, I think about Patricia Miranda, I think about Shannon Williams, Afsoon Johnson, right? Dating myself a little bit, but in my era, I remember when I was a freshman in college and I was on the Pan Am team, and I saw these women, just getting it, right, getting after it, and just And I had a female on my high school wrestling team for a little while. So I had been exposed to women's wrestling, but not at the level that, we're at the Pan Am Championships. And then you come to find that these are world champions, world medalists. And it's unfortunate that back then they didn't have an opportunity to wrestle in the Olympics. And then Patricia Miranda, the first woman to win an Olympic medal. She's a teammate of mine and, multiple world medalists. And then, HBCU side, right? You got Takara Montgomery, the first Black woman to wrestle in Olympic Games, right? And then you can just continue to see the layers of built. And I assume, I don't know, but I know for me, like when I was younger and I looked at a poster, I saw John Smith and Kenny Monday as Olympic champs. I was inspired by that, right? So I'm sure that both boys and girls, they look and they see, the women that made that 2004 Olympic team, the first women's competition at the Olympic Games, and see what they had to go through to make that. And then prior to the Olympic teams, seeing these women that were winning world championships, making world teams, going out and doing it year in and year out. Christy Davis, she's a New Yorker, and she has 8 or 9 medals, at the senior world championship level, right? So I just think about all of the people that came before that laid the foundation for women's wrestling. And, was really able to open the eyes of the sport. When people look and they say, I remember, and, maybe not as glamorous, but I remember the first time I saw a cauliflower ear, with a woman that had cauliflower. And it's like, they were getting it, right? In that situation, because we all know that we have cauliflower, what it takes for that to happen. So I just would give a nod to all of those folks that, were doing it in the past that didn't have an opportunity to be on a collegiate wrestling team for women. They were on the men's team and, didn't have an opportunity to compete at the Olympic Games. And now we have, Olympic champs, and now we have, multiple medalists at the Olympic Games. So I think that they are very important in this process and, really inspiring to all, men and women, because without that, we wouldn't have the success as a country that we've had.
Oh my gosh, here. Yes, totally. I mean, and they were doing it when people were like, why are these women doing this to their faces and their ears? Like, what are they thinking? They're going to like ruin their beauty. I mean, it was like ridiculous, right? Like I remember standing at the New York Athletic Club and hearing people talk like that. It was insane. So totally. I'm so glad that you pointed that out. And those women, we owe them a debt of gratitude. There's no doubt about it. So Jahi, do you want to add anything to it, or?
I think it's kind of hard to follow that up.
Yeah.
For the context that Coach just gave, I think he did a great job of just summarizing. I think just the partnerships with D1, right? I think that's a really strategic partnership that we did so that we can continue to align with both of our missions of growing the sport of wrestling and women's wrestling in general. But I think that's really what we're trying to do.
And I think the message too is it doesn't have to be, like as wonderful as obviously Sally Roberts and Andrea Yamamoto and Joan Fulp are, and of course all of the trailblazing athletes that really solidified the sport. It's really just about being gender allies, right? It's about like opening up your club and being welcoming to women. It's about being a high school coach and putting up flyers that include, boys and girls welcome, all those little things, having a bring your sister to practice night at your club or whatever you can do. And especially if you are a person who is a gatekeeper, right? A person who's in a position to make decisions, like grant permission for us to be part of it and for there to be equity and inclusion. It's all we're asking for. So anyway, thank you so much. I just love to highlight people who are working hard and know that the sport is building towards equity for sure. So, all right. So before we end, I know we're just over an hour here, which is way too long for folks. So we have to close up. But what can we do? Like, what is our call to action here with HBCU? I know I'm going to actually just put up our website for hbcurwrestling.org and what are people going to find when they go to this website?
Yeah, so when they first go to the website, they'll see some just introduction, like just kind of showcasing and highlighting what the problem is. Over 100 HBCUs, none has Division I wrestling. And then they'll be able to go through the site. The main 3 ways, I guess, in terms of call to action, right, is we're looking for people to continue to invest and donate, right, and give generously, so that we can be able to continue to grow our mission and be able to get these programs established. Just given the dynamic of HBCUs, they've been underrepresented in terms of funding in the past. So really it's going to take a significant financial commitment in order for us as an organization to provide and create these opportunities that we're so all excited about. So that's one way, but then the other way is like really supporting, continuing to resharing, getting the word out there. We're really early in like the infancy stages in the sense where the program just got announced, but we haven't started wrestling yet. And so when those programs get started, it's going to be really important that we show those programs support, right? We're reposting it. We're showing up to matches as a community, making sure that things are, like that the program and the wrestlers are really feeling how important this is and that they're a part of something that's historical. And I think the last thing will probably be is like organize and really get involved in the community. So being able to get back in the community, making sure like showing these kids that they have the opportunities about to go to HBCUs and kind of giving the history about HBCUs to others who might not know why this initiative might be important. So anyone that wants to organize on like a grassroots level to help kids see wrestling in college or at an HBCU as an option, or just to inform your neighbor like, hey, like HBCU wrestling is important, not just because of the name HBCU, but because all of the historical and cultural things that come out of these institutions. So those are really my three main things. I think they're pretty broad and they cover pretty much everybody. I think everyone could find themselves in one of those areas, but really this is a movement that's being started, and we're really at the beginning, really of a revolution. It's something that's going to be good for our sport, right? We're going to make it more competitive. We're going to bring more kids, more people, men and women, to the sport, and just I think it'll begin to help us grow our sport outside of the core wrestling community, because a lot of wrestlers we stay within, but I think once we start adding programs at HBCUs and adding women's programs, we start to tap into a different audience of the historical basis of what wrestling fans look like.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is let us know that you're interested. If you're interested in coaching, if you're interested in wrestling, if you're interested in, learning more about the sport, maybe you're an administrator and you want to be an administrator school that has wrestling, get in touch. Jahi is all over. You can get in touch with him, a million different ways. So reach out to the organization, just say, because again, like we talked about earlier, if Jahi can go to a school and say, you know what, I got an email from 5 women yesterday that said if you had a program at this school that I would be there. And they're just not, just any average person. They're state champ, they're national champs, they're high caliber athletes that will come in and raise the profile of your school. So really getting in contact with us and letting us know your interest, whatever level it is, I think that adds to spreading the word and supporting. But that piece right there, because it's a foundation, right? It's the raw materials. If we don't have any athletes, then the programs don't make a difference. So if we don't have any coaches, the programs aren't going to make a difference. So anybody that's interested in participating, anybody that's interested in knows somebody, hey, there's this kid down the street that is a monster. She's been beating up on the boys, beating up on the girls, beating up on everybody, and just, she wants to wrestle in college. Get in touch with us. Let somebody know. Don't keep that info to yourself, right? So I think that's really the big thing is spreading the word, but letting us know if you're interested, if you know somebody that's interested, knowing someone that can, really benefit from, an opportunity at the next level.
And you guys have a newsletter also, and there's a link, right, to sign up for the newsletter on the website. So it sounds like there's something for everybody to do, right? Like, if you can't donate, you can get involved, you can help, you can be part of a working group, you can create community, you can create momentum. So we can all get involved. Our wrestling community, our national wrestling community always impresses me. And so you, all three of you are amazing. Like keep talking, keep spreading this word. And I have no doubt that we're going to see some pretty quick momentum here. And I have my fingers crossed for Division I women's program soon. Yeah. So
hopefully next time we come on the show, we'll be announcing the Division I HBCU women's wrestling. So no promises, but hopefully sometime soon we'll be able to say that and do that. So
awesome. Well, do you guys have any other nuggets that you have to share before I let you go? No? Okay. Well, I'm so grateful.
I just say again, thank you for everything that you're doing. This is awesome, and really looking forward to to a partnership, but you are superstar, content creator, mom, wife, wrestling aficionado. So just keep doing great work and look forward to working together to continue to grow the sport on this meaningful level.
Ditto to all of you guys. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.